So the history talks about that our culture, our law has been raped. It's a sad story. But that story needs to be told so that the world can understand, the world can know that what is happening in the other corner of the world, which has been a hidden gender, has to be publicly known and proclaimed.
The earth will not vanish. That's the law and the fundamental belief. It's this soil here, the land. That's our law. It has been existing before the colonization of westernized world.
For 60,000 years, Australia has been home to over 400 Aboriginal nations. Over 2 centuries of conflict, oppression and assimilation have left them fighting for their cultural survival. Nearly half of their languages have been lost, and many are critically endangered. Across the country, the clash between worlds continues, as the oldest culture in the world is besieged by its youngest. One such place is Northeast Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, the home of the Yolngu people. Yolngu on Elcho Island is the largest community in the region.
Their culture is alive and well to this day. We are not here to fade away. We are not here to die out slowly, but we are here to retain our heritage, our beliefs, our spirituality. And that's the way our old people have kept it, and that's the way they are handing it down to us, and that's the way we will hand down to our generation.
Yolngu nyalo uni ora namuna ta yodi angonga tangala kamulka ora kapilmayo kadal karayo mulka ora de angamuna ta yo kakapando kakamanongo yo.
Calendar law, like all and change, because government is always change. Marako Rome, buying on knowing how to change. This is law from coming in from Nada. Oh, that's why buying will change.
During the late 1800s and early 20th century, whilst much of the country was being colonised, the Yolngu gained a reputation as proud warriors who fiercely resisted any occupation by outsiders. Today, whilst their culture remains strong, their future, like that of other Aboriginal nations across Australia, is under threat.
My name's Genevieve. I'm a single mother with 4 children and 9 granddaughter and grandson. I live here. And I'm being a strong grandmother, but living in a place awkward with 3 families for themselves, only a three-bedroom house.
Hidden from the eyes of the world, 2/3 of Aboriginal people in remote communities like Yolngu live in overcrowded housing.
This room here is where all the elder boys, all the old boys, you know, the family stop here, our sons and nephews. They have this one special room there. There's 5 of them. Go with you. They say 5 to 6 boys again live in this room. All my other nephews and sons. This is like the overcrowding of a house. Just this one house. Go with you. Go with you. Mama nakadwala, galing up. This is half of the family in this house. Tonight it will be like a full house.
When they were living together, 20 or 30 people in one house, it's ridiculous. For health, it's like living in 700 years in Europe.
We have to be overcrowded because there's no more housing, and there's promises like housing is going to be built, yet we're still waiting for that houses.
Medical research has consistently shown the link between overcrowded housing and infectious ear, eye and skin diseases, all of which are now widespread in Yolngu.
Diseases and illnesses that are commonplace in the third world but ought to be unheard of in a rich industrialised country like Australia. The levels of those in many Aboriginal communities are appalling.
Health and mortality statistics in remote Aboriginal communities are some of the worst in the world. On average, an Indigenous person will die 17 years younger than a non-Indigenous Australian. Child mortality is 3 times higher.
It's a huge indictment, I think, of Australian government policy over recent decades that things have been allowed to get this bad.
Despite decades of government attempts to close the health gap faced by Indigenous Australians, little has improved, with Aboriginal life expectancy now the lowest of any Indigenous group in the world.
It's a poverty. We live in a poverty. But that wasn't our problem. We were rich. We were rich when we were living alone in our country.
Before the arrival of missionaries in 1942, the Yolngu lived a nomadic life on their ancestral clan estates, now known as homelands.
In olden day, people used to get buying of sickness at all, nothing sickness, nothing, healthy all the time. Because ngata in Aboriginal food is balanced. Yolngu people doesn't live in one place all the time. They move from place to place. Mainly missionary people make us stay in one place and give us raising house and all those.
In the mission like Yolngu and many other places, we're being taken away from our estate, our country, where there is a value, where there is a taka, where a really good taka, a good food, a natural food. We were taken away by church, by the welfare. We've been taken away. We were put into the yard, and they said to us, stay in the yard.
The imposition of this new way of life has been shown to cause ongoing problems for Indigenous people in Australia.
People who are predominantly based in townships, they don't get enough exercise. Their nutrition is much poorer, and subsequently they have greater rates of obesity and high blood pressure and greater rates of diabetes and heart disease.
Indigenous Australians are now up to 40 times more likely to die from diabetes than non-Indigenous Australians, a disease that had never existed before the arrival of Europeans.
It wasn't our dream to come to the yard. It wasn't our dream to come and eat in a white man's table. It wasn't our dream to come and wear white man's clothes. It wasn't our dream to work for the white man as a slave. We were free people.
Throughout these changes, which in places like Yolngu have only taken place over the last 70 years, Indigenous people have been expected to fast adapt to Western society.
Yolngu here, they don't understand. They don't understand how to live. Living in a Balanda's world, that person should have an education first. Somebody to come and help that person or show. But they just come and growling at people.
On top of these rapid changes to their lives, their traditional systems of law and governance have been undermined by white authority.
Balanda is pushing Yolngu. Balanda is trying to say, look at my way. This is a better way.
Aboriginal traditional law is still alive today and still practiced. Ceremony are still alive. What's been happening in the last 100 years or more is that we are ascending into two laws. Our own law and the Western law or the Balanda law. The law that was introduced to us, a law that is now being practiced in this country.
For generations, the lives of Aboriginal people have been controlled by government departments based thousands of kilometres away, who have devised laws and policies without the involvement of Aboriginal people.
The government has done many damage by trying to establish an organisation which will control Aboriginal people, like Aboriginal affairs, welfare for native affairs, then indigenous affairs, just to look after us like we were a little child. Our law has been ignored, rejected.
He's got grade 3 scarring, hasn't he?
Yeah.
You know, my baby...
30 years of research have shown that in order to improve Aboriginal health, communities must be given back control of their own lives.
Aborigines are not consulted about policy and planning. In many places, Aborigines want to be involved and really care enough, but they can't get involvement at other than a most menial level. And this is appalling. This is particularly so of West Australia and in the Northern Territory. And they should be, in fact, making decisions and being consulted effectively.
Aboriginal involvement must be improved. Only then can their health and their pride and dignity as a people be restored.
To this day, however, this specialist research has been ignored. Ongoing disempowerment and decades of inappropriate government policies have caused the health of the Yolngu, like other Aboriginal nations across Australia, to spiral. In 2007, Gulawinku had a glimpse of hope that things would finally change in their community.
When Minister for Indigenous Affairs in the previous government, Minister Honourable Malbrap, when he came here, he introduced himself, we were really happy, we got this man.
What's the material that you're using here? I don't mean the art.
He came, he promises that he's going to give a 50 house. He's going to give a good health, there'll be education and classroom, new buildings, new houses, everything. That was his promises. We said to him, look, this is good, this is the way things need to happen. And so there was a lot of that discussion. But when we start to serious about things, when we start to put our head together and start to talk about serious things, that's where the bombs start. And we said, now I'm minister. It doesn't happen this way. We cannot sell a value of land or lease it for a long time. This is the only hope for us. Billions and billions and billions of square in the continent of Australia, you already bought it. You're not satisfied. Why? What do you want more land for? Go back. Don't tempt us to sign. So he went back.
The federal government is about to intervene in Aboriginal communities in a way thought unimaginable just a few years ago.
We have decided to act. The decisions we have taken are non-negotiable.
The Prime Minister has rejected criticism of his radical plan to curb Indigenous child sexual abuse.
The government's actions came in response to yet another report on the underlying conditions in Aboriginal communities, this time on the symptom of child abuse.
Where there is unemployment, poverty, alcoholism, drug taking, overcrowding, you can guarantee that those children at some point are severely at risk and eventually are going to be sexually abused or abused in some way.
The first recommendation of the Little Children Are Sacred report once again urged the government to commit to genuine consultation with Aboriginal people.
I do not believe in any way, shape nor form that the recommendations flowing from that report reflected the urgency.
In an unprecedented crackdown, the Prime Minister moved to take control.
Every single one of them has pedophiles operating in them. Now that is a national emergency.
The government will seize control of Aboriginal townships and access to lands will be opened up.
We need to have control over the homes, the conditions that they are in, who is in them and what is occurring in those homes.
I don't think you can respect power structures in these communities when clearly those structures have failed to deliver.
Among his sweeping changes, Dozens of extra interstate police will be sent in and 50% of welfare will be quarantined.
It is interventionist, I accept that, but what matters more? The constitutional niceties or the care and protection of young children?
Whilst declaring the Little Children a Sacred Report as cause for emergency action, the government ignored nearly all of its 97 recommendations.
I was shocked. That was not the response that one would expect to such a sensitive issue. The government didn't speak to community leaders or talk to the Aboriginal community or get any advice. They just went and did what they did.
That's what this is about. This is what we're trying to do.
We need proper consultation, like from your government.
Yeah.
Come in here and give us.
Well, we've already done it.
Yeah.
We've already done it.
You already done
this
it.
is already law.
All right.
And the reason for that is that it was an emergency.
We basically a bit upset too, like as being a landowner.
Yeah.
We haven't been consulted.
Yeah.
About,
Yeah.
You know.
No. Well, we no, that's right. I acknowledge that those people, like Reg, have got every right to be a bit cross with me because there was no consultation. And the only thing I can say, there was no consultation with anyone else either.
Without any consultation with Aboriginal landowners, the government seized all community assets and dismantled community-run programs. It brought in white officials to manage the communities, replacing institutions that communities had taken years to build up. Communities across the Northern Territory were devastated.
We have been demonised for mistreating our children, pedophilia, alcohol abuse. What we need to do is to listen to the people when these situations are found to be in any community without passing judgment.
The intervention has further stigmatised Aboriginal people by erecting signs in each of the seized communities, publicly displaying its new laws.
It's really sad. It makes me feel, that means they including all Yolngu, all bookmark Yolngu. Everybody, every Yolngu doing bad things.
This is what they call a lucky country, but not so lucky up here. We're going through so much pain, many of our old people are going through so much thinking, so much worry.
Feel, I got now feeling, it's a pain. It's a real painful, it's a real hurt. Not only me, I am too old, but it's gonna be that the feelings will be continue dragging to the next generation to come.
It was only aligned to Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory, so, totally racist. And you know what? They're all black. Oh, isn't that a surprise? Not for us, it isn't. You have always been a racist government from the very day you arrived here.
This is an outrageous authoritarian crackdown.
Now we're seeing elements of racism.
The government is treating the people of the Northern Territory, the people of Australia, with contempt.
And what are we then here? Are we the citizen of Australia, Yolngu people, without our rights? See, how can they be saying you are a citizen of Australia if we don't have the rights of anything?
What are my people? Who are they? Are they human beings? Have they got a pride and dignity just the same as a man or a woman or a child living in a city?
And then they're using the children boozing so that everyone will be quiet around the world today. No, that's liar. They was putting the front of that one so that everyone world today is listening because his children is special.
What cost do you put on the life of a child?
There's widespread sexual abuse of children. What greater responsibility do you have than the care of children?
Children deserve and need us to implement things today.
Don't take that, but you don't listening for that. That's only covering area. That's only the blanket. The world wanted to have a look what they was looking for really, government in Australia, to take up the dignity right and the land.
And I had a dream, and I might have had the dream for a long time, to start this intervention.
We believe that this government is using child sexual abuse as the Trojan horse to resume total control of our lands.
The government undermined key parts of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, designed to give Aboriginal people control and ownership over their lands.
They ignored setting up rehab programs for children who's been abused. You know, they didn't even mention that. All they talked about was sending in the troops, sending in more public service.
You know, the widespread abuse, you know, the pedophilic activity, the sale of, you know, sex for petrol, you know, all abhorrent activities. What's interesting is that 3 police inquiries are yet to identify a pedophile ring. They've yet to identify all this child abuse that was reported at the time.
Aboriginal people are often stereotyped in the media and demonised for problems that are not entirely their own.
For a lot of people in Australia, they get informed through the media. And if the media is portraying a certain picture, then that's what people believe. There's always going to be the tensions between how the media reports an issue and the real issue on the ground. You know, you might have 1 or 2 offenders from a certain racial group, which is never presented like that. It's presented as if the whole group is you know, has offending behaviour.
And they blame every time Yolngu people for drug, for alcohol, for murder, everything. And they don't see their own backyard. Their son is murdering more people, stealing more things, drinking more drug, or taking more drug. They don't see that.
They're the one which bring the movies in here, all the selfish law and the sexual abusing, you know, man to man, woman to woman, kids, you know, and the disco and this sort of thing. And now they're blaming to the Aboriginal people and the Indigenous people, which is we haven't got one of those. Before the 77, the Queen Authority was landing in Australia.
We can see their westernized world, they're heading into destruction. We are seeing it being done in our community. And their way is not of our ways, you know.
Uninya kan malan marengi, unimal tiang bala marengi kamar kole. Yutta Yolngu ka yutta niya ka yutta delamo. Memba, waktu marang, wala langgal liyay. Kamanguci ka nama, kalis ning buturi, katalkan hati.
When exposed to another culture, like through the American movies, TV, that bring in Western values, where there are such things as vindictiveness, violence, then those things must be passed on.
Increasing Western influence, combined with the undermining of their own culture, has created social breakdown in many Aboriginal communities.
We have given refuge to our kids, you know. and we thought that was going to be passed on. And when it's stopping the trajectory, you can see the evidence. We had these like break-ins, sniffing, people going into places, burglaries, because that wisdom is not being passed on.
We live in a stage of anarchy. You know, this is the people thing. Subculture is a culture that destroying who we are. You cannot say it's Aboriginal people. It's a disease that's just moving right across the world. Anarchy, there's no law.
That world has been introduced to us, and everything that comes with it is an invader of our system, our people, our life, our mind, our very ngayango within.
Community is now getting so much contamination, but this only affects the communities, but it doesn't affect the homeland.
We're lucky we brought up that bush. We learn things with our parents. That's my mum. We tried to be the same way, take our children away from town.
In the early 1970s, the expansion of the mining industry in Northeast Arnhem Land, led by the contentious Nabalco mine in Gove, resulted in nearby towns becoming plagued by alcohol and social breakdown. In response, Aboriginal families began to move away from the destructive influence of the largest settlements, back to their ancestral clan estates. This became known as the homelands, or outstation movement, and was a critical turning point for Aboriginal self-determination and cultural survival. Today, for those still based in the townships, these homelands are a vital world away, to which frequent visits provide much-needed emotional and cultural well-being.
My skin and my identity within, my knowledge is placed upon the land, and they can't take it out. It's like a root in the land.
We learn the most mysterious wonders that this land holds. And that's the secret that we are fully rich with. It's the richness that no one can take away from us. It's not only knowing that you own the land, but knowing that the land owns you.
That is our library, that is our university. All that story is back there, back home. And it can be only given through the knowledge of our ancestors that actually takes us to the land and show where everything is.
Well, it's a worm called mangrove worms. We call it latkin. It makes me now, we want to eat it now instead of telling stories. My stomach rumbling for it. It's related to me. It's my mother. My mother latkin. When you eat this, it's like a spaghetti. You go like this. Just stripping the mud off it.
I like being in the bush. In town, it's too much noise. Some we can bush for honey. It's yummy.
Okay, we're going to the bush area. When we see these flowers like that, that's the time we find ukko. We chop the tree, then we chop the edges, and inside the trunk, that's where the honey
honey is so dear.
The homelands are more secure because people are in their family groups. They're not so vulnerable. They're on place where they have authority. On the townships, it's foreign land that cannot nourish themselves on that country. So they take their nourishment from these other things, from the movies, from petrol sniffing, the marijuana, the other drugs that are around.
In 2009, there remains a significant difference in the lifestyle and expectations of people living in urban areas and people living in remote areas. This has to change.
In May 2009, the Northern Territory Government announced its Working Future policy. It deems an estimated 10,000 Aboriginal people living on their traditional homelands to be economically unviable. The policy will freeze funding for services to homelands and gradually force everyone into 20 designated growth towns. The government ignored its own consultations with Aboriginal communities, which had demonstrated overwhelming support for the homelands.
The anger is palpable over the Northern Territory Government's Homelands and Outstations policy.
It's not applicable for homelands, and it's not what we need.
Anger spilled over in Arnhem Land today about the Territory Government's plans to create 20 remote community hubs and freeze funding for hundreds of homelands. At Yilpra, copies of the policy were burnt.
This can't be happening. It just comes in different forms. It's the same wave that comes in different forms.
Homelands are of fundamental importance to the survival of our culture. This is very serious.
That's the most important aspect of our life. We are connected to our land, but the government doesn't seem to recognize that. They don't understand our system. The government says that there's going to be limited funding for smaller homelands. People are going to be forced off their land. People are going to be starved off their land.
Like now in Wanga area, like Ngarako Wanga, like Matamata, that Ngarako Mari. But everything there, Ngarako. That's why you have to take in the Balanda people. Buying. Because that land belongs to Yolngu.
His land is his flesh. His ancestors, going back thousands and thousands of years, have been in that land. And if he's pulled away from that, it's like ripping out a part of your mind.
In the same week the government announced its homelands policy, the Medical Journal of Australia published a paper showing that Aboriginal people's health is much improved by living and working on homelands.
Working as a general practitioner in a remote community where I serve both outstations and a large centralised community, it's plainly obvious to me, seeing what comes through the door, that homelands deliver lots of advantages in terms of health and a healthier lifestyle, where exercise is easier, the diet's better, and people certainly are less stressed.
It's impossible for many of the people that I know to have a future in the central townships, in the centralised towns that have really been created by government for bureaucratic convenience, not for the convenience of the people who live out there, for the Yolngu.
In 5 years, I want to see private sector investment underway in each of these towns, including private housing, boarding school facilities where appropriate, and the gap closing tangibly on education and health.
In its efforts to improve the lives of Aboriginal people, the government has taken away the very thing that has shown to improve Aboriginal health, the capacity to live on country, whilst promoting the centralising of Aboriginal people into larger townships, already crippled by social dysfunction, poor health and overcrowding.
It's highly disrespectful for government to continue to tell people, this is how you will do things, this is where you will live, this is how we will administer you. People have no future, no positive future
when they're continually directed and pushed from pillar to post and around by government policies.
Why? Yolngu people. Why Walakajama who really was the first place? Yolngu Bichayama. And they put my chimut puno, Balayan Lagakat, Bia Pundo Piguanja. Suit change, yet running in a pun. Many put Babuliki, Kabitibiki.
I'm not going to go and tell the Prime Minister to be Yolngu. Is that ridiculous? That's how ridiculous this matter is. For outsiders to come into invade our community, invade our families, invade our land, and tell us how we should live, tell us how we should spend our money, tell us how we educate our children, tell us how we should look after our children. You just can't do that. Because you won't let me do that to your family.
They got rid of the Indigenous community councils and put a white man there so he can control the Aboriginal communities, town camps and outstations, just like the old days, mission managers. No, I've got grandfathers and great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers still alive that have lived this life before. It's still repeating, history repeating over and over again. No, we don't want to live this life because our grandfathers have lived this life. I'm sure you wouldn't want to live this life.
In the house and out the door, chopping wood and scrubbing floors.
The belief that the Aborigines were racially inferior and not able to participate in modern society led to the adoption of paternalistic policies in almost all of Australia in the 20th century.
Washing, ironing, mending too, sometimes making kids but just you.
The Aborigines did not have any rights as citizens. They could be placed on reserves where their lives were dominated by white officials and where, in many, many cases, the children were taken away.
One of the most well-known acts of assimilation by the government was the forced removal of Aboriginal children from their families, now known as the Stolen Generation. Right up until the 1960s, more than 100,000 children were taken away to be indoctrinated into white society.
When the missionaries came and we were put into an institution, now there were things happening there which was not acceptable at all. You wasn't happy. The happiness came from not being beaten up by doing what you was told to do.
And when their lessons are over, it is amusing to see them fall out of school just like ants out of an anthill.
There was the slow deterioration of the old way of life from the years and years and years of that new learning of how to fit into this society, and discouraging you to remember yours, where you'd come from, and your people and their way of life.
Originally, I guess the assimilation policy was a way of just breeding out Aboriginal people, this idea that white people were superior and that the best pathway for Aboriginal people was to be more like white people.
Assimilation is the object of native welfare measures. This means, in practical terms, that in the course of time it is expected that all those persons of Aboriginal blood or mixed blood will live like white Australians do.
So assimilation, which was a conscious policy right up until the 1960s, is still implicit in much of what Australian governments do. Anyone who has studied policy towards Aborigines will recognise there many of the same attitudes and policies.
No, we're trying to do some good things here.
God bless you for it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
In February 2008, the newly elected government of Kevin Rudd apologised for past injustices towards Aboriginal people.
We apologise for the hurt, the pain and suffering we, the Parliament, have caused you by the laws that previous parliaments have enacted. We apologise for the indignity, the degradation and the humiliation these laws embodied. We offer this apology to the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the families and the communities whose lives were ripped apart by the actions of successive governments under successive parliaments. So let us turn this page together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and write this new chapter in our nation's story together.
That's all we want. Just a little time for the feeling. That's all we need. Just a little time for the healing.
Congratulations to you, Mr. Rudd. You made it very clear that you are the leader. But a question today, why is the intervention still going on?
We support the intervention. It's a difficult decision. It's a controversial decision. I don't back away from it. It's the right thing to do.
One of the government's main arguments for maintaining the intervention has been to provide much-needed housing in Aboriginal communities.
The health implications of the severe overcrowding that exists, of course, worst in the remote parts of Australia, really make it imperative that we look at this housing question.
To my left is the houses for government teachers, and on my right are the government employees like Shire that work for government, and yet we are here still waiting in the middle. But when they said we need more teachers, we need more employers, Balanda employers to come and work for us, boom, the house is there. We're thinking, what are we compared to the Balanda people?
Intervention has been established for that purpose, so that can come in and build a house. Why do we have to surrender a land so valuable for 40 years to build a house? This is their very word. You want $38 million to build a house here? If you don't want to sign 40-year lease, we'll go away and use that $38 million somewhere else. Like a bribery, really. I don't believe they really care about the kids. If it would have been, they would have done it the time they set.
Serious about housing, build new houses, housing, severe overcrowding, serious about people who are the most vulnerable.
Children deserve and need us to implement things today.
And we shouldn't have to trade off citizenship rights for our land. You know, we don't expect that to happen within mainstream society, so they could get housing, so they could get an upgrade of education facilities, upgrade of health facilities. We do have differential treatment, and it's an issue that is something that has to be tackled.
In August 2009, the Australian government's behaviour attracted the attention of the United Nations.
The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights has spent the past 11 days touring the Territory's Aboriginal communities. Today, James Anaya delivered his assessment.
These measures overtly discriminate against Aboriginal peoples, infringe their right of self-determination, and stigmatise already stigmatised communities. The emergency response is incompatible with Australia's obligations.
Australia, in fact, has legal obligations in relation to protecting the rights of the Aboriginal people. The adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples means that there is now a legitimate platform on which governments can be challenged about their decisions.
In April 2009, the government signed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, one of the last 3 countries to do so.
What we need to know now is what is the government going to do to implement the rights that are contained in that declaration. What is the government doing to recognise self-government? What is the government doing to recognise Indigenous leadership that is chosen by our people themselves, not appointed by government? What is the government doing to recognise that our own organisations are valid organisations and should be responsible for decision-making and delivery of programs and services?
However, the government has since breached most of the articles in the Declaration. Teaching in Indigenous languages is being phased out of schools in the Northern Territory, and community councils have been replaced by government-controlled bureaucracy.
So not only are they taking away our ownership and control of those lands, but they're also taking away our capacity to govern our communities.
In the midst of all this, Aboriginal voices continue to be silenced by legislation that circumvents the Racial Discrimination Act.
The name of Yolngu people will extinct. We will be still existing, see? But the name itself will go extinct. I have a body, and then I have a shadow. That shadow is my culture, and it sticks to me. If my shadow goes away, I'm sad. If they're taking away our permit, taking away our rights, it's like eating our shadow away. And the government mob are trying to eat our shadow, but they can't.
Human rights for all! Stop the intervention! Human rights for all! Stop the intervention! Human rights for all!
Intervention and occupation of their country again. There's been a new wave of invasion up there. Another wave of genocide against us again. And what we are saying, we're going to say to this rap government, enough is enough. We're not going to put up with it anymore.
We want to maintain our cultural existence and our existence as Aboriginal people.
We have to tell you people what the government, our government is doing, your government is doing. It's as if only white people own this country and not the black people. We will not cry for our children and our country and our culture, which the government is trying to take away from us.
I don't think there's any doubt that Australia has the poorest policies and position in relation to the rights of the Indigenous peoples. Australia is probably the only modern government to deliberately take an action to say, we will discriminate against your rights as human beings. We will create you as being lesser human beings than all the other people living in Australia.
The government has just come in and they've really come to disempower Yolngu people because they would rather see Yolngu people not taking over our own affairs, so they can come and mine on our land. We believe that our homelands is very rich of mineral inside. The government is after the mineral in our land.
Australia holds a vast proportion of the world's mineral resources, including 40% of the world's uranium. Many of these deposits are found in the Northern Territory, where mining is the region's largest industry. 53% of the land in the Northern Territory falls under Aboriginal control which was taken away under the Northern Territory intervention.
The government is just hungry for more money. They want to dig more land. They're just finding an excuse to move our family out of our country, own country, you know, our birthright, where our initiation grounds are, and move us here.
Under the new homelands policy, Aboriginal people will be forced off their traditional lands and into the main towns, further exposing their country to mineral exploitation.
Quite clearly, the government direction and the government policy is to end our identity as peoples, to end our association with our territories. This ensures that the governments have control and ownership over all resources in Australia and that there will be no opposition.
So our people are still confused. Our minds are not resting. Our mind is like a computer, because you are coming and putting that little chips inside into our mind and saying, go, 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 until you die, and then I'll take your land.
Australia's violation of the human rights of its Indigenous people is legitimised by its legal system. Australia remains the only Western democracy without a Bill of Rights, and its constitution does not have any provisions that protect the human rights of all Australians.
This time of the century, we're sick and tired now. I'm getting old now. We need to change the Constitution of Australia. And now.
The Constitution has never recognised the rights of Indigenous people. It was written at a time when Indigenous people were considered to be a dying race and an inferior race. It was also a constitution that was designed to ensure that the Parliament had the power to make racially discriminatory laws. It still has that legacy today.
Elsewhere, of course, it was different. It had been different in North America, and it was different when the British settled New Zealand and when they settled most places in the Pacific. That is, they recognised that the native people did own the land. And so settlement was carried out by signing treaties.
There is now such treaty in this country, now such treaty. The first people who came here, they said, Australia is a country without a people. They couldn't recognize that there were people, there were human beings. They were first people of this country.
The Latin term terra nullius, meaning empty land, was used by the British to justify taking over the country without any negotiation.
They were standing on the shore one day, saw the white sails in the sun. Wasn't long before they felt the sting. White man, white law, white gun. Don't tell me that's justified. Somewhere, someone lied.
Australia today takes her place among the nations. We are building a great industrial civilization and developing a new race, a new force in the culture of mind and body. In this sunny land, sport builds a racial physique equal to any in the world. Australian history already bears the blazonry of glory.
The Aborigines were seen as savages, without any form of governance worthy enough to be recognised as the sovereign owners of the land. Therefore, no treaty was necessary.
Where we are standing now, too far as that camera can see, still sovereign land. It belongs to somebody, or the land does own someone. The land does own someone. It's a Yolngu person.
Australia remains the only Commonwealth country not to have signed a treaty with its Indigenous people.
Until the issue of a treaty is looked at and solved, till that negotiated settlement has occurred, that question of legitimacy is always going to be hanging over Australia. So they perhaps need a treaty as much as Aboriginal people do. And for Aboriginal people, it would be a mechanism to be able to get legal recognition of many of the things that we've lost, the protection of our languages, our culture, our history, rights to education, health and housing, rights to dignity, all of those sorts of things.
There are more things to be done. Sovereignty needs to be a challenge. The changing of the way of dialogue. The things have to be done through negotiation. But you need to be very, very careful that you talk to the right people. And the right people are the born leaders, not the leaders that you raised them. You have shaped them and say you are the boss. It's not my man, it's your man.
We Yolngu people have been waiting patiently for a long, long time to sit down and talk about our issues, sort out our issues. You tell us what we're doing wrong, and we'll tell you what you are doing wrong. And we'll meet in the middle, and somehow create a better partnership than what it is now.
We can build Australia together. Don't think that your people can only build Australia. We can build, we will be part of it if our right is recognized. If we are being put into the same level, not as a second-class citizen in this country.
We have an opportunity for understanding the oldest culture in the world, oldest living culture in the world, and we seem uninterested, as if it has nothing to offer us. It's an opportunity that no one else in the world really has, except us in Australia.
We have to show other people who are coming in, especially non-Yolngu, who are ignorant of the existing culture that is here, that existed before the flag was raised at Botany Bay. Their law is only a couple of 100 years old. Our law goes beyond. It's like looking across the sea and you can't see the end. That's how far our knowledge reaches. It's never ending.
Standing strong in my culture, keeping culture alive. Standing strong in my culture, keeping love alive. Standing strong in my culture, keeping customs alive. Standing strong in my culture.
Seems to me that it's going one way. Yolngu are learning Balanda way, westernized world. It's about time that Balanda has to learn our culture and respect.
Standing strong in your culture.
People don't have rights to change who we are. We can't change you, so you don't have the right to change us.
This is time for us, the black people, to talking about to what's happening like this time to us, like life. Black people are alive. We have to speak up ourselves.
Tuanja Yolngu. Stand it to a strong deer. When you are to win. Yolngu need to win. Tara ka wanga. Una government na mukmarang.
It's a time that the leaders, Aboriginal leaders, have to get together, to put their head together. I'm talking to you, mob, now, all my Koris friends, all my Maoris friends, my Nongas friends, and the Yolngu people, Binning people. We've been divided and conquered, divided and conquered. Get away from it. We have to start fighting together.
Slumber, wiping tears from our eyes. Peace from this nightmare, yes, I must now awake. Open my fists to my destiny, I take. People sick and tired and pushed around. We call them kings, but I see no crown. You tell me when you think we'll just stand up and say enough is enough is enough.
And if my brothers and sisters in the other end of the state, you are listening to me and watching this TV, I want you to be a part of it. Part of the struggle of our people to feel. Don't just say to our people, I'm going to stay with the black people. I want to stand with them. I want to stand in solidarity. Solidarity is not enough. Because you can stand with me for all those years and seeing me falling down. I want you to feel that pain. I want you to take action. And the action is to work with us, to put our head together, to fight the system. Fight the system that there is now freedom.
Someone in the city gets a piece of paper. Someone in the bush holds the law in their hands. Last chance for freedom in our generation. We're not the only people in our generation. Cultures fuse in a global nation. Our generation. Human rights for indigenous people. Our generation. Learning life's lessons.